Welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning, everyone. How's it going?
Good morning, gentlemen.
It is a morning.
Welcome back.
It's been a while since we've been live on air. This is a little early today, so we have some people got meetings. We got things to do, work to happen. So we pushed this podcast a little bit earlier in the morning. So apologize for those of you who are starting at 7:30. I'll have to catch up a little bit on double time until we get there. But today's episode, let's just do a quick introduction of what we're doing today. Today's episode is around filter context explained. An article came out from SQL BI talking about filter context explained visually. So you're doing some images and diagrams and showing how the DAX works. Really good article. Very excited to jump into it and unpack this article. But we can finally officially talk about Microsoft Ignite because we're actually live after the actual event. So it was amazing. Tommy didn't do anything dangerous, as you may have heard on previous episodes. We didn't get lost, but it was a really good event. It was a huge event. I didn't realize how large this was going to be.
Yeah, man, I had so much fun at Microsoft Ignite. They did a great job. I think what was the number? 10,000 people who were actually attending.
10,000 attendees. I've never been to Build before. Are they typically this big, Seth? I don't know. Ignite. Sorry, Ignite.
Don't know.
So
never been.
They did say that when they went to Orlando, the largest they had was 22,000.
Wow, that's huge. Orlando, interesting. Okay, well, Orlando's pretty big. They've got some big conference centers down there. I've been down to some pretty large events down there. Very interesting.
It was just really nice having it in my backyard. Like I just did the whole city thing. Like I took the Metro in, and then I took those divvy bikes, rode through the city while jamming out to Billy Joel to get to the conference center. It was probably the best time I had.
Freezing your butt off.
Yeah, I got one day.
Maybe a little cold.
Yeah. We had like an inch of snow one morning when we woke up. It came through pretty quick and dropped some snow.
I will say this conference for us as Power BI people, it's been a long time since you felt there was so much dedicated to the data platform. And you kind of see too where they had basically these help boosts for all the Microsoft products, the business applications, Teams, Azure, this really cool server center for hardware. But the data space was taking up a good amount of room. And I think we're seeing that's because of Fabric. It's not just us doing little Power BI reporting. It's like, oh, well, now we actually kind of touch all of these items. So that was awesome.
There was two kind of main messages I felt like I heard a lot at this conference. One of the main messages was everything is AI, something or another. Everything was built with Copilot in mind, building your own Copilot. There's a lot of training and help around how to better prompt a Copilot to get what you want out of it. They had these little cards that they handed out that was really interesting, giving you like, here's 4 sections of how you should prompt things. This is what you should be doing. Explained a lot about what is a Copilot agent, how do those work. So I was really interested in a lot of this and trying to figure out how do you integrate this with your business. And in talking with people there at the conference, people are starting to really, I guess, change how they do their work by utilizing and leveraging AI. I just read an article from, I don't remember what the company was, but the company was using AI to do all of their sales and marketing materials. And they were saying that the AI generated images of their products and the messaging that was going with it across social media was actually more interactive, engaging, had better engagement than just standard hiring an agency to do that. And they were saving millions of dollars a year in advertising because the AI could just generate a lot of these things faster without paying someone. Someone looks at it, approves it, pushes it out, and then they can just watch the metric come back on it, and it comes back better. They customized it for regions. They customized it, like you could have it rewrite the language for different countries and really cater the experience to what would resonate with that audience, which is very interesting to me. So anyways, really cool stuff. A lot of AI things there. And Tommy, I would agree to you. All the announcements that kind of came out of Ignite was really around Fabric, not necessarily out of Power BI. What was were there any announcements Power BI related? It was all Fabric stuff. Really?
Yeah, usually they have some little demo of what they're working on with Power BI. There was nothing. I mean, a little tiny bit, like kind of like really what Power BI is now is just a cog in the machine.
there was some really interesting things. There was the very last, and this is when you're kind of at the end of the conference. The very last day, Kim Manis and Mo came up and did a kind of what's going on with Power BI, what's happening in the future Power BI. Some really good things announced there that were there. They're talking about the Tyndall editor, huge news there. It's going to be really big. We've done a YouTube video on that one already, using Tyndall inside VS Visual Studio Code. Awesome tool. Really like it. Tyndall's going to change how we build things. So there's a lot of really rich features coming down the pipe that are going to make things really, really exciting. Anyways, any other announcements? There's actually an article here. There's an entire Ignite recap. So the entire Ignite recap is here as well. So we'll put that out there as additionally in the chat for you who want to check it out. This is kind of all the major announcements.
Yeah, I mean, there were so many announcements that they were coming up with, but I think we will probably be spending episodes devoted to a lot of the main features. I think I really love what Arun does after any big conference is here's a major blog article. We're going to cover the high level of what we're working on in the major products. And there's really three major kind of themes that were kind of introduced at Ignite for Fabric. We have the first one is this databases, which we've talked about before. We actually were able to do a live reaction video, which was so fun at Ignite. But man, that's kind of crazy that how many places we can store data. The next one is workloads was your thing.
Workloads is out. So workloads is a Fabric thing that lets you do things with data and elements inside Microsoft. There's not many workloads out right now, but we have a workload out. Power BI Tips has just released a Power Designer, which is a workload that releases a full ability to edit or modify your theme files right inside Fabric, which is kind of a neat tool. I think a lot of other tools will start taking advantage of this as well. I'd like to see more tools come out there, which would be very helpful to drive adoption either of Fabric and or making your Power BI creation stuff easier. There were some other announcements, Tommy. You said the SQL database was like the really major announcement for Fabric, I think. I think it was like the highlight for a lot of people.
So, yeah, I mean, these Fabric databases, it's a full-fledged SQL database. There's no, it's not a diet or junior version of a normal SQL database they would spin up in Azure or however else in terms of member roles, being able to query it. I was already testing creating a database and using it in a Power App. It behaves and acts just like a normal database, but it's so easy to spin up. This is along with the ability to also mirror databases as well, which usually had some limitations depending on what database you're coming from. But this, we can get the data in. We can pull in from pipelines right now or from Dataflow's Gen 2.
Okay. All right, Tommy. Give me a little. So, okay, I'll be honest. On the podcast, I've been harping a little bit on Dataflow's Gen 2 because it just hasn't quite kept up with what I think we need as developers to build and create things moving forward. Tommy, I feel like you've had an experience here at Dataflow's Gen 2. You've been very pro Dataflow's Gen 2 is the way to go. It's fine. It's good to go. And I still had a couple qualms there. Tommy, I think you've had a recent friction point for you in Dataflow's Gen 2.
So here, I don't want to say here's my problem, but they're coming out with a ton of articles, touring the query editor and SQL database and documentation on these new Fabric databases. And that's great. That's awesome. The trouble is not all those features yet are available or work.
It's in preview.
I know, but it's not only in preview. It's not even out in preview yet, or like for all tenants. So, for example,
here's an example.
It's basically, all right, just, there's a new custom Fabric database connector to say where you want to push your data to. That does not exist in my tenant. It's just a normal SQL database. So I was like, okay, I'll just put in the query string. We'll be good to go.
Okay.
Well, as soon as I did that, basically, I think my tenant's like, you're not ready for this yet. So we're just going to bug out. So, yeah.
Literally, there's some substantial bugs going between Dataflow's Gen 2 into the new Fabric SQL database. Is that kind of what you're saying?
My entire window would just say error message, try again, but I couldn't exit out of the data flow because there was no publish button anymore. So, and everything was working until I got to that stage. And this also, if you're in the database and you say, hey, get data from a data flow, automatic trouble. So there's some features that they're talking about that are going to be in preview, but I think they're so excited to get out there that we're not. And this is like any preview feature we've talked about, right? Like, and this is as cool as this one is. Are you going to be moving all of your data to a Fabric database right now?
Fabric SQL database? No.
I
I
would
think
like, yeah.
so. Here's where I'm a little bit torn, and I think there needs to be some more communication in the community around where does this SQL database thing fit. My impression is SQL databases are more for transactional information, real time in data. It lives on top of an app. You're bringing your app data directly to Fabric. Fabric runs your backend now, and it automatically mirrors. So by default, the Fabric SQL database mirrors data directly into Fabric. So it should give you like almost near real time information around, hey, build your application on top of Fabric, in addition to doing the data engineering and the reporting outside of it. So they're trying to bring those tools into Fabric as well. And we had a an open session with Suresh, I think is his name. He was talking. Suresh is kind of the one who he's the VP of the databases inside Fabric, I guess. And he was talking about we're starting with SQL, and he alluded to other databases that Microsoft owns, like Cosmos and potentially Postgres. I don't think he mentions MySQL particularly, but there's other database systems that could be potentially brought directly into Fabric as a native application or native tool, which is really interesting. My opinion, most of what I do is on the data engineering side, and it's not so much transactional processing app building. So I think we're adding a new role into the Fabric ecosystem. I think the SQL DBA didn't really know where they fit, honestly. You bring out Fabric, you're like, we have all this Fabric stuff. The SQL DBA is like, well, what do I do? I got to learn notebooks now and move that direction? And so I think what we're seeing now is now that there's a SQL server here directly, I think a lot of companies are going to feel comfortable moving directly into that and starting with the SQL database directly inside Fabric.
Do you guys feel that shift though here? Like what's interesting to me is like up to this point, Fabric is the analytics platform.
Yes.
And now we're suggesting that we put production transactional databases that are supporting applications and things like that into the same ecosystem.
Oh, so you're right. And I think I'm feeling a shift. Microsoft is throwing like everything and the kitchen sink inside Fabric now. Like this is the tool. So does it make sense for us to give us a lot of so let me just tease out your idea a little bit, Seth, because I like where you're going with this one. There's a shift of happening where we want to not only use Fabric as the analytical engine, but we also want to use it as the operational data engine for everything.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if I'm buying into that quite yet. I need to see some more results. Again, it's just coming out in preview, so we'll have to kind of tease this out a bit more.
The follow-up to that is, as they're announcing this and the capabilities, is it the full, like when you start going that route, it's it's been really important in my experience to have absolute control over everything about that SQL instance.
Indexing columns, all the backend system.
Have that, right? And then the other part of this is like,
good question.
The other part of this is, okay, so now I'm paying for that via the F SKU, which is a generalized SKU, not specifically for the service I'm spooling up. I mean, I'm not. It's an interesting thought. I'll have to ruminate on it a little bit more, but at the same time, when you're building production systems that are transactional backends for applications, you're talking about the engineering people, right? It's not I don't know how to spool up a SQL instance. In Azure, and I don't know, I need the quick button that lets me do that, right? Like they're the ones that are going to want absolute control around costs, expenses, like manipulating the machines and how they work with the application, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
And that's where I have lots of questions, I guess.
So,
and what happens when you run out? Like if you have your production server running and your Fabric SKU runs out of capacity, does it throttle you? How does that work? Like,
does it take down your production environment or slow it down? just because of that one little thing? Do you stand up a workspace with just your databases now? I suppose that's the option, right?
That's probably the alternative, to isolate that away. Like, so what happens when Tommy runs this incredible AI generated notebook thing and it just hogs all the CUs? What happens now? Like, what do we do with the SQL database? And so I just, your point, Seth, is very well taken. And I think there's a lot of unpacking that needs to happen here. Like, how much control do we get? How much of this is being automated by Microsoft? In other tools that we brought into Fabric, Microsoft has given us like some knobs, but not all the knobs, right? Even if I think about Spark, like you get like some of the knobs, and they're now getting to the point where there's a lot more control around Spark. You can do a lot more with it today. And we're getting new things. I think something was just announced on Twitter. The Python notebook now appears inside Spark, or the notebook experiences, which is not Spark, it's Python. It's pure Python. Really cool. I need to try that out. I heard it's very fast and super performant. So interesting as well.
Question here. I thought we're using obviously PySpark and already. What's the difference here? We're just using Python.
It's not the Spark engine. This is just pure Python running. It's running, I believe, my understanding is the Python is running on a single node cluster. I don't think it scales out. It's multi-threaded, but it's not multi-machine. Spark uses a worker node and multiple nodes. That's what I was kind of gathering about the difference between the two. So I don't know, to be honest, I don't know too much about the new Python notebooks, but I've seen a couple people doing some testing on some moving of large data things, and they're saying it's much faster because there's less overhead on the back end. Incredible. Like, now we have more options, but this is not making it easier for people to decide things, right? This is just making it a whole lot harder to figure out what's going on. Like, which one of these things should I use to best optimize? Which is good. It means we have options, but on the other hand, it's like, do we have too many options yet?
I think this is what we're running into, and I cannot wait to spend the next many episodes talking about the choices here. That being said, at least from the database side, I'm really happy with just the experience, because it's not going to be we're moving our entire processes and what a company usually has in a database to Fabric. But do you know how many times I would have
that's not what they say. That's not the intent, though.
Exactly.
Like, you're saying that, but that's not like you read the main article and they're like, no, now you can add everything in here.
Yep.
I know. I get it.
Like, I'm poo-pooing a little bit, but at the same time, like, the reverse of that is it's extreme. Like, SQL's been around for forever and a day. It is extremely easy to access that data regardless of where it is. However, if that's just another data repository and Fabric is now going to be this thing that contains everything, if I take out all the other kind of questions or concerns I have, like the fact that the data is in the ecosystem and is just a share away, or I don't need to move it or have another copy of it, like, yeah, that's compelling, right? You're saving money in storage, or like everything's in that same Fabric ecosystem, and that story still resonates a lot. So I just want to make that point, but Tommy, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I've just, over the years, just this ability, I wish I had this for so many different solutions where we're trying to get connections, is like, we're just going to create some crazy semantic model and there's SharePoint. So this is going to save that.
There also was talk about a potentially new native visual that was going to allow write-back. That was another idea here, because now that these SQL servers exist, write-back seems to be getting easier. So also very interested around those points. Like, so to your point, Seth, maybe it's not, maybe we won't use it initially at full production workloads, but I do think it makes sense if you're going to do like a Power App, maybe. If it can work with Power Apps and keep that Power App data very close to like the data system, and potentially you can use Power BI to write back some data and get that to update your records and visuals really real time. Okay, all right, we're reducing some friction here. It doesn't need to be so heavy technical anymore, and it just kind of works. So I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what they come up with on that side of things.
Yeah, the two other kind of major announcements, at least among many, there's real-time intelligence is now generally available.
Okay, great.
Dude, the amount they must be getting so many requests from their major clients for real time, or Gartner said, look, the only way we're going to keep you in the lead is the real time thing.
Okay, that's interesting.
Or if you turn on real time, you're their best customer.
I think that's more of the issue, not more of the issue. I think more of the item here is you turn on real time. It's a machine that's on all the time. It's consistently consuming compute units. And I guarantee you there are some people that are asking, there's a handful of customers that are doing things in real time fashion that need to have data moving in real time. I totally get it. There are use cases for it. 100% agree there. Does it need to be reporting for every single thing? Probably not. Again, this is our question we always ask ourselves: is it a balance between value and cost, back and forth?
Yeah.
So
the fact that it's a working engine, right?
Yes.
That I think one of their use cases was an airport has implemented this already for tracking it. Like,
makes total sense.
Keep track of the whole ecosystem of not just planes, but like what's going on at an airport.
Mm-hmm.
Heck yeah.
Yep.
Right. Like amazing that the solution is
making it that easy to get going. Yeah. I mean, I have worked with an airline to build reports for them. When those planes sit at the gate, and it's just sitting there, and they're not leaving on time. I mean, you're talking thousands of dollars, like a minute of money, just being waiting
to run ticker. Like,
seriously. Yes. So when things are late, people get angry because there's so much money invested in getting these people and things, and like you miss your second flight, it's going to cost a lot of money just to have people rerouted on other. It just gets really expensive really quick. So I could see why airports would make sense for real time stuff. There's a lot of manufacturing things that make sense to be real time production numbers. Those things, I think those also make a lot of sense as well. Excellent. Anything else?
Real time.
Anything else we should cover off on?
I think the last kind of major announcements is, which I've been using a lot, is the OneLake catalog. Which is replacing
that just came out. I'm interested to see what's your initial impression on it, because I heard about it. I haven't had time to play with it. So what's your initial impression on the OneLake catalog?
So we've had for a while the data hub, and then it changed to the OneLake hub in Power BI, and it just kind of showed like a list of everything, which would then just bring you to a new window or a new screen, which was like the default view. If I clicked on Lakehouse, I'm in a Lakehouse for Glimpse semantic model. It's going to go to that default screen, which I didn't use ever. I am now using the OneLake catalog combined with, if you're using task flows and tags, it makes it seamless to find things and easily go through configuration. So it's just a much more organized way. And then plus, if I'm looking at lineage, refresh settings, see it upstream, downstream, there are all these kind of miniature tabs when I click on it. So I'm still in the data catalog to be able to see this. So I'm now from an individual point of view, so far so good. It's great, but I think if you organize this with tabs or tags, and I think this experience, if I'm a business team or if I'm a team to say, hey, we need to see all the things that are where we're storing our data. Well, it also integrates really well with the ideas in task flows, what type of action you're doing. So we can filter based on, hey, prepping data, storing data, whatever those may be. So it'd be great for a team to say, okay, what is all that lineage that's going up to how we're first getting the data from such and such? Okay, we'll filter by domain, we'll put the tag, and we can easily see those data flows or those notebooks or those pipelines. If I want to get a more like report view, again, it's a very seamless experience for depending on the person or audience persona that you are.
This is them growing up a little bit. This has been really, this is what we need to be seeing, right? Honestly, there's so much getting created now. This is where I think we need to be going. This will be fun to go through. What specifically is it called, Tommy? I'm trying to Google the article on it or the.
Yeah. So right now, I think there's only the.
Is it the Fabric Data Catalog? Is what they're trying to go
OneLake catalog.
OneLake catalog. Okay, that's the current branding. As we have it today. Okay, I'll just get that and put the link in the chat for people to.
Have you tried it out at all?
I have not. I need to go do some learning on it and then go play with it myself a little bit. But I will get the link here for anyone who else wants to play with it. Tommy's finding some value. We'll check it out as well.
Yeah.
All right. With that, we are pretty far in here, 25 minutes in. Let's get into our main topic today. Let's go over to SQL BI and let's talk a little bit around how do we handle our filter context. So, Tommy, you want to kick us off here a little bit and give us some ideas around what is SQL BI going through here, and what should we kind of take away from key notes or key important parts of this this article that SQL BI came out with?
Yeah, so this is a pretty different take on something that's very well known, well documented. What Marco and Alberti actually done is actually kind of created visual representations of really how filter context works and all the components of it. And again, it's just I think I've seen a few different ways that visually show it, but it's not easy to explain what the filter context is, and it's not easy to explain how it works. Mm-hmm. So I love the visual representations here. Again, it's not diving into all the components of filter context, but basically the high level of adding, ignoring, or updating the context and a visual representation of that, which is a different take. For me, I think for us, this article hits home because filter context was that one of those concepts that it was a change in how to comprehend something or think about it rather than like learning a new coding language. Mm-hmm. Is I had to change my way of thinking, not necessarily how to memorize all of these components. And that's what made it so hard to master. So just wanted to kind of revisit that. And I guess, what are your guys' thoughts, just kind of rekindling the filter context for me?
I think this is an area if you're ever going for a job interview, you need to internalize this article.
For anything?
Just for Power BI related, right? Oh, okay. I think when I interview people, I ask them, what is filter context? And people have a hard time articulating what that is. And my understanding is it's so pivotal to everything you write inside DAX. It's how you build visuals. It's how you write the DAX. It's how you look at a matrix and figure out, okay, why do the rows of data not match the total of the data? It's because there's some filter context being removed. It can actually see more data than what is shown on the actual visual. So and this is one of the reasons why visual calculations appeared, because visual calculations were helping you do things in the visual that made it simpler for your mind to wrap your head around filter context. So I think this article is something everyone should read. You should have a knowledge of what it's doing here and be able to explain this, be willing to explain this to someone else during an interview. Because if you don't know this stuff, this is going to really impact your ability to do your job well, I think.
Mm-hmm. I think it's such and I agree, because anyone using Power BI, especially those coming from Excel, right, mm-hmm. have this concept of how data works. And this is fundamentally one of those concepts that you need to ingrain in your head. Like, why is something happening the way it is that I don't expect, mm-hmm. right? And if there's still that old preconceived, like, this is how it works in tables of information that I'm used to just manipulating or directly touching this thing and not that, right? Like, there's a whole lot more going on, right? To your point, there's concepts that you need to understand that are kind of you put together and then see the results as you're building out calculations within the tables themselves. I guess what's an interesting early question from my perspective is how Tommy, you do a lot of training. Like, mm-hmm. I don't know how much you're doing these days, but how early on are you bringing in this to the conversation?
Oh yeah. So really, when it comes to the training journey, and this actually, I love that was something I was going to mention. There's a series of trainings for DAX, and especially introducing it. Actually, use some of the stuff. Actually, Mike, you created, I think, for just kind of going through some of the pop quiz things, because we have to introduce the basic concepts first about mm-hmm. DAX, and we talk about model relationships. We talk about briefly just about, hey, if you disconnect the relationship, what happens? What if you count from another table? So very basic things, and we're showing how it works. But it builds up, and something that I always share with people who do training with me is, this is a different way of thinking. That's the hard part. It's not because you have to memorize 200 functions and, and all these different components. It's simply that every model is different, which changes your DAX. And it's just thinking like Power BI is. So our advanced training, we don't talk about functions. It's a really advanced into row context and into evaluation context. And again, there's no way someone in an hour is going to be able to go through that. But no, I mean, we introduced that kind of early on, but the basics of what a model is and then relationships first before you really get into the functions.
Yeah, I would say so. This is one of the first concepts I kind of introduced to users is try to identify if I put up a visual on the page, let's identify what is the filter context of the individual data points that we see. So this is a very early concept I'm trying to draw forward. We may not be going into all the nuances of using the filter pane to adjust a measure and filtering things, but I do try to get people to mentally think about this as this is pivotal, because a lot of times what I feel like the pattern is you build some measures, you build a visual, don't quite get what you want, and you go back and you kind of remodel some data. Either you change the shape of the data so it better fits the visual, or you add new measures to get the output that you want. So I always kind of talk about it as it's like a seesaw, right? You spend some time doing the measure building, and then you spend some time visual building and report building. And then you go back and say, you make some changes, and you kind of teeter-totter back and forth between measures and then making reports and more measures and model changes and then going back and forth. But filter context is so key that this is an early concept that we adjust and we talk about very early in our process. Did it answer your question?
It did.
Where do you think it fits, Seth? Do you think this is like a core element here, or do you think this is fitting? Would you?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to hit the foundations underneath it first, right? Like all of the what you just described. Like, how do you build a model? What are the relationships between the tables? Hopefully, they're facts and dimensions, right? Like, how complex is the model versus a simple model, right? And what does that do for some of the functions that you're building related to even understanding filter context and the different ways we can manipulate. And I think that's ultimately the value in here is not necessarily just saying, hey, what I'm presenting is right or wrong, right? Or I don't understand it. It's I'm given the constructs of a bunch of decisions are leading up to this point. How do I manipulate this function to produce the results that I want? Because there is a ton of flexibility in DAX that allows us to, and what I love about the article here is walks into those areas where if you're grasping this idea of filter context, how do we manipulate that context, right? Like I can do that specifically in these areas with such a, with the DAX language. But it's where you don't have the fundamentals down, where I think people start tripping, like going back and forth between the ways you can manipulate things, not understanding how to manipulate, like what they're doing.
Yes.
Right. Where it's I think the challenge being people who are new to DAX are instantly going to communities or sites for the specific answer. Right. And then seeing responses or seeing answers to other questions that are just slightly different, but they don't understand that slight difference. And in a lot of contexts, it's like it's that one part of the calculate statement that is switching the filter context that they don't get, right?
Yes.
And they would need to. So that's the nuance, I think. And even someone who like learned DAX, right? Like those are the, like it can be very straightforward and simple. But the nuance of understanding each line is extremely important, and this concept of filter context drives all that.
So, and I will never forget for me when just getting into Power BI and really want to take the next step. My wife used to work on Saturday, so I basically told her, like, I don't care what you do after work. And I just got the Definite Guide to DAX book, and I probably spent hours just going over the 2 chapters or 3 chapters and calculating and that evaluation context. Because again, this is not something where it's like with Power Query, it's like, oh, there's just, it's pretty straightforward. Here's all the things you can do within. That's how you master it. I mean, this is simply, you can read it. You go, okay. But until you're actually applying it and really thinking how Power BI is thinking. One of the things I always say in training is I'm going to refrain from saying that whatever you are going to see the demos that we do, I'm going to refrain from saying that's wrong. A better way to say it is that's not our desired output. Because according to what we did, we're getting returned exactly what we asked, basically. We just don't know what we're asking for. So even when you have those repeating numbers, basically, like the same value for like a filter ignore, it looks wrong. That's obviously not, in a sense, something you put on a report, but based on how the model is, that's what the output's going to do. So I always kind of get that idea that, hey, that's wrong. It's like, well, based on this and this, based on what it's going to do, it's always going to output that. So that getting over the hump, what were some of your guys' kind of techniques, or if you can remember, like starting off that journey, where you're like, okay, I need to master this, or I need to comprehend this. What was difficult for you, and what were some of the techniques?
Well, I want to give you just like 4 notes that I find that kind of trip up new users. So if new users are jumping into DAX, here's 4 areas that I find that are kind of struggles for them. And this, I think these are the same things that I struggle with as well. Maybe there's 5. I'll throw a 5th one in there. So the first one is, what happens when you see multiple numbers multiple times? You build some dimensions, you bring a column over, and then you add a measure to it, and you see the same number repeated for every single row. Users get this, and they're like, I know that's not right, but why? And that's usually like pointing to, well, you don't have a relationship between those 2 tables, or you have so many tables and so many relationships, you don't know where the relationships are actually coming from. You need to simplify. So that's kind of one point that funnels into my next point, which is overly complex DAX usually means your model is too complex. The tables are not designed right. You have snowflaking kind of things, and you're trying to count things in dimension tables that should actually be a factual table. So when I see a lot of, measures sitting inside what I would consider call a dimension table, text, you're trying to count things there. That's usually when you get yourself into problems, because you're trying to count something from one dimension table to the second dimension table, and there's no join between them, and you don't know how to go between the 2 tables. So it just creates a lot of headache. So what you have to do is step back and say, how can I reshape the data? I probably need to add another factual type table to do the calculation that I actually want. So that's another one that gets people tripped up. One that's a minor, but I think does trip up people, is totals on a matrix don't match up to the rows, just because of, again, not understanding filter context there. And then the last 2 here are like mixing granularity of data. So let's say I have a budget that's at the monthly level, and I have actuals that are down to the daily level. And sometimes we need to see the granularity of the data at the day level. So when we have granularity of data that does not match the same grain of detail, we find there's problems. And so I continually encourage people to say, let's bring the granularity up to the highest level we can, because it simplifies a lot of things when we just bring the granularity up a level. Whenever we have to bring the granularity lower, meaning add more definition to certain numbers, we start doing my what is it called? It's the phrase I hate to hear, right? We're going to add some, like, we need to extrapolate the data. We need to transform the data to make it, handle this other granularity. And that's when I'm like, oh, this is never going to add up correctly, and the business rules are never going to really match what you really want it to show. It gets really crazy. So yeah, the grain is so important there. And my last thing that I think people get mixed up on, the 5th point here, is just date time, just time calculations. How do I do this month? How do I do last month? How do I do year to date? What do those things look like? Because now you're shifting the context of a single data point and pushing yourself around based on that time range. So those are the 5 things that I think that trip people up when you start getting started with DAX.
That's a good one. I think even with all those concepts, DAX is one of those languages that it just takes practice, right? Like getting to the point where you can read filter context. So 2 points. What I love about Marco and Alberto is they're true experts. They've been in this for a very long time. And what they can do, unlike I think anyone else that I've engaged like in content with is just their level of detail and clarity of examples in how to break down these very complex ideas and like ways in which you need to interact with DAX. And even then, like it still takes us 4 times to read it, right? And the definitive guide to DAX was one of those same experience.
Gotta read
like
it.
You go through a chapter and you're like, okay, I'm going to start over now. Now I think I got 20% of it, right?
Yes.
I'm going to go back and get the other 20 and the other 20,
Yes.
etc. And it's one of those where you have to practice the components of things. So when I started a lot, you would quickly found myself in situations where I knew about 80% of the code that I needed, but like it's always, like I said, it's always the small little one sentence thing that changes the filter context that gives you what you want. And I found myself practicing a lot, just the fundamental, like one column, the measure. Okay, introduce this other aspect of it, and variables was a really easy, like good way to do that within the same measure. But just additively putting together the calculation in different ways and visualizing it in tables, and then knowing I got to that final place, right? Like putting it all together. And I think I think this concept in DAX forces you into those situations where you have to practice, and you have to continually practice if you want to maintain that level of, I'm going to sit down and know what measure I need to write right off the rip without testing. And I honestly, like, unless you're in it day by day, you're gonna always go like, wait a minute, what do I have to do here again? Right? Like, where am I at? Okay, this is what I want to do, et cetera, et cetera. But either way, a fantastic article. I'm glad you brought it up. Like their way of visually bringing this into like another layer of explanation, I think will help a lot of people, and would definitely be the link I use, if and when I get around to training.
And I think this is also really important too, is like, I would almost encourage people at some point, like if you ever get stuck on some DAX, this is a good pattern to start following through and say, what would the filter context be? Because you can take the same DAX statement and drag it with many different columns of data and see how it performs. Like, okay, I have this calculate sales amount where sales year equals 2017. You can go in and you could grab a number of other columns, customer, country, region, and you can see how they behave. And so using that, you can kind of step back and say, okay, what is it actually doing when I do these things? And I think that is a really good experience to get into and learning about DAX related things. I'd highly recommend their book, Definitive Guide to DAX. I put the link in the chat window for those who want to check it out, because it is definitely the best place to learn this stuff. And Marco and Alberto are by far the experts in this area. Their articles are very well written. And I will agree with you, Seth. I got to read it like 2 or 3 times to make sure I really understand what's going on, so I can implement what they're teaching you. But they're great teachers.
And kind of drawing this back full circle, right? Like when you're talking about interviewing people, right? Like, do you know these concepts? It's not just a single line answer.
Yes.
A lot of times, right? And that is where if you want to level yourself up as a Power BI developer, you have to be able to talk through these concepts, right? You have to like when somebody says, "Hey, do you understand filter context?" It's not just like, yeah, here's my one sentence answer of like, yes, I know it. It's all of the stuff we've talked about, like, because the follow-up question to that is like, oh, great, like where have you struggled with this before? And instantly like whether or not somebody understands the concepts of what they're building. And I think it also points to and I don't know why this is a nagging thought that like the entire time, the complexity of this job to some degree, right? Like when we're ripping out reports, like there's a high degree of thought, of development, of value that we're bringing to an organization in that, like, we're taking raw data and putting it in completely different forms to analyze, to track, to deliver insights. And models and DAX have been that pathway for us to do that. And it's it's an amazing language and technology that we've been able to leverage, but it certainly demands that you get your head around those conceptual blocks that just improve over time, or that you build upon to make better solutions, and or be quicker about what you're developing.
Donald actually makes a really good comment here, and I'll point this out as well, because I think this is potentially a good muscle to use, right? Learn more about DAX, work with others, learning more about DAX. Kerbal is a website that does training around DAX and other things. She did a lot of Charticulator and other training things around Power BI as well. But she has put together a 25 days of DAX, like a Christmas edition, right? So you can go through her website. I'll put that link here as well. 25 days of DAX has just begun. It's only day 5, I believe, because they're going up until Christmas. But if you want to join the challenge, there's a 25 days of DAX challenge. There's a data set you go get, and you go build your own DAX to answer questions that she produces. There's some rules and other things as well. So anyways, just want to kind of point that out there. If you want to learn more about DAX, Kerbal is doing something really fun for the holiday season. I want to encourage that and push some of the community things out there as well. Well, I think with this kind of episode, this has been a lot of talking around Fabric Ignite. I think a lot of changes are coming for us. I'm very excited to unpack these new features. So very excited about that. I'm very excited for Microsoft. Thank you very much for bringing Ignite to Chicago area. I mean, I really enjoyed it. And with that being said, this is a good conversation around DAX and filter context. I hope you dig in a little bit deeper. Go pull some books from Marco and Alberto. Go read the article for sure. That's definitely one to go read from the SQL BI team. And, unpack a bit more about filter context is. Ooh, that was unpacking like a Christmas present. Unpacking. Tommy, with that, I think we're good. Where else can we find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple and Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps out a ton. If you have a question, an idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about. By the way, even during Thanksgiving, you guys were keeping busy with the mailbag. Head over to powerbi.tips/mailbag. Leave your name and a great question. Finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join us on all of our social media channels.
Oh, one thing I will have to say, the Power BI Tips website has gone under a substantial change. We have redesigned it because, shocker, our old MySQL database has gone awry and decided to turn itself off because the company we're working with, not Azure, decided to turn itself off. So the whole website has been rebuilt. So we got a whole new website. It looks different. It'll feel different. So we'll make sure we get all the links and things up and running again, make sure everything's back together again. But yes, there will be a new website up, and you'll see it looks a little different when you get to Power BI Tips. That being said, thank you all very much for your time. We appreciate you, and we'll see you next time.